all kinds of backup quarterback stuff. We'll talk about running back trades, center trades, and maybe podcaster on podcaster violence. It's the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Locked On Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I am your host, your pal, and the kid you copied off in math class. My name is Luke Braun. You can find me on Twitter at Luke Braun NFL. Show is on Twitter at Locked On Vikings. And thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day, every single day. Today on the show, it is Twitter Tuesday. That means I'm answering your questions. If you ever have questions for me, you can send them to me anytime at Luke Braun NFL or at Locked On Vikings on Twitter. I usually put out a call on Mondays, or you can just DM me. You can also email me at lockedonvikingspodcast@gmail.com, and there's also a Google form in the show notes for longer form stuff if you prefer that. With all of that said, let us begin with this mailbag. We kind of hit all of the bases here. I love these in-season mailbags. They tend to run the gambit of all the topics going on, so I like to be able to kind of get everything at least touched on if I don't get to deep dive it all through the week. The first one is one of a few about backup quarterback. So we're going to start with that, and it comes from Matt Guess. It says, of all the realistic QB2 options out in the world, what is your ideal scenario? Also, after glowing reports from his workout with the Raiders a couple months back, any thoughts on Kaepernick? Love the show. Keep up the awesome work. Thank you so much, Matt. So I guess I'll take that. I'll take the Kaepernick bit first. I don't know what Kaepernick still has in the tank. He's been out of football for, 5-6 years? Obviously, that's going to carry a lot of risk, and I don't know if that is the best idea for, like, an insurance policy. But that said, it could have a whole bunch of upside and stuff. It's certainly always worth a workout, right? See what he's got and hope you can be happy with it. But in terms of the QB2 options that are available, somebody else asked about what about the guys on the roster. I'll get to that in a sec. But in terms of, like, off-roster people, what about trading for someone or something? So there are a few options. I've been asking around. There are a few options that come to mind. One, hilariously, is Cooper Rush. I kid you not. I don't know. Cooper Rush might not make the Cowboys, and we have seen that he has the ability to fill in a primetime game and limp your way to a win. Don't make any mistakes. Deliver accurate balls. That's all you need from a backup, right? So that's one. Really funny. We actually played one. Nick Mullins is being outplayed by Will Grier on the Raiders right now. He is also somebody that's been a fairly decent upside guy. We've seen a lot of him with the 49ers. We're talking about QB2s here. You know, he's not going to be a superstar. He's not the future of the franchise or anything, but he's certainly made a career for himself and probably belongs somewhere in the league as a backup quarterback. That's more than we can say about the guys on the Vikings roster right now. Carolina is a really interesting place. You've got P.J. Walker in addition to Darnold and Mayfield. Now, I don't know what their situation is or who they're keeping, but it feels like the Carolina Panthers, and they just drafted one, right? Matt Corral. Or Corral. So it feels like P.J. Walker's the odd man out there. He would be a very, very cool backup. He's probably my favorite of all of those. And there are a few other ones that are kind of all around. You might lose somebody like Mason Rudolph from Pittsburgh. He is supposedly on the trade block. It feels like there's a lot, like, kind of look at anybody who drafted someone who's like playing even halfway decent. Somebody's going to be cut from Washington. Somebody might be cut from Tennessee. There's a lot of interesting names out there. Like, it's actually pretty flush. So I do think if the Vikings don't feel good about Mannion and Mond, the options are definitely available. And if they don't acquire someone, it certainly wasn't for lack of supply. Somebody will be out there, and some of these guys might just get cut. You might not even have to pay a pick. That brings me to the craziest option comes from Brandon, who says, what are your thoughts on taking a chance on Cam Newton for backup QB? So for this, I'm going to have to put on the tinfoil hat because I've got a theory about Cam Newton. Because it is a little odd that Cam Newton is, and if you're not watching on YouTube, if you're just listening to the audio, know that I just literally put on a really poorly handcrafted tinfoil hat with little tinfoil horns on it. So Cam Newton is not signed, and I think that's a little odd. Now, obviously, there's health, right? Like, are his knees okay? Are his legs okay? Can he run and all that stuff? Does he still have that athleticism? Does he still have that ability? And if not, what's left over? Is that good enough to be a backup? I would think, like, probably. I think that just belongs on a roster, right? Maybe not as a starter once he's lost some of that ability, but it belongs on a roster, right? So what's the deal? Why isn't Cam Newton getting signed? My tinfoil hat theory is that he has long COVID. So remember, he missed a whole bunch of 2020 with COVID, and it sounded like he actually got a pretty bad case, and he kind of was never the same. Like pre-COVID and post-COVID, Cam Newton was demonstrably different. And long COVID can happen to anybody, and a lot of that is going to like affect your ability to do cardio. So my question is, can Cam Newton pass a physical? If he can pass a physical because he doesn't have like the long effects of a virus like ravaging his body, and he's still not getting signed, well, I don't know. Maybe he's just old. People don't trust him. Whatever. People want to stick with their rookies. Whatever. But I don't know if Cam either way, right? Whether it's health or age or my tinfoil long COVID theory. I don't know if Cam Newton has the ability to be on an NFL roster right now, but you never say no to a workout. So for that, I say sure. Cousins Goat asks, do you think that Mond can be a credible backup this year? Ain't that the $1 million question? The answer, I think, is no right now. I talked about Mond in some decent depth yesterday on yesterday's show, and we talked about him a lot on the Minnesota Football Party that came out today on Monday. Or yesterday on Monday, because you'll be listening to this Tuesday. But my answer is he took a step, but not yet. He's still a little bit too limited in terms of his arsenal. He kind of has two pitches. He's got a fastball, and he's got like a touchy sort of corner of the end zone lobby one, and that's kind of it. His timing is all over the place. He's hesitating a lot. He doesn't trust anything right now, and it seems like his confidence is really, really broken. And that might be okay if you're willing to be patient enough to say, yeah, your confidence is shot, but we're just hoping that you learn, not that you like perform. But then you have to be willing to kind of keep him on the roster. And if he's in this work in progress kind of state, you can't put that on the field in the event Kirk Cousins goes down. So you need someone else to be QB2. So if I'm keeping Kellen Mond, he needs to justify a 53-man roster spot without being good enough to be a backup quarterback, because I don't think he is good enough to be a backup quarterback, or he needs to prove me wrong on that, which he took a step toward in the first preseason game, and maybe if he takes more steps forward in the rest of the preseason games, we can talk about it. Kieran asks, interested to hear how you felt Kevin O'Connell did with calling the plays. Personally felt he married the run and pass quite well. I know the runs on 2nd and 10 were memed a bit, but still. I don't really care about run-pass ratio when it comes to preseason. I barely care in the regular season, especially not in the preseason. It's just not really what I think play calling is. It's not the most informative way to look at play calling. I want to look at how those things marry and how those, like how the run plays from one formation interact with the pass plays from that formation. What spaces of the field are those attacking? And you'll usually find some really interesting insights when you start asking those kinds of questions. But the actual frequency of it, there was this interesting, I'll go on this quick tangent. There was this interesting Sean McVay article that came out a week or two ago. This big, long feature from Seth Wickersham. And in it, he said he's got his play card from this last Super Bowl, and he's like the little notes he wrote to himself. And the first one is see the game one play at a time. And I think that's good. I am going to follow some Sean McVay advice. Seems like a good dude to follow the advice of. And say, let's see the game more one play at a time and less about frequencies. You don't go into the game going, all right, we're going to be 60% pass today, and we'll be 70% pass next. You don't go into the game doing that. You're calling each play in a situation. And each one is kind of its own individual thing. And that can cause you to miss the forest for the trees, like sure, and end up, oh my God, whoops, we just ran way more than we expected to. But hey, the situation's called for it, and that's how we did it. And that's why I think explains a lot more of run-pass ratio than like somebody's philosophy about what's better between running or passing. You're just going to learn a lot more if you look beyond the ratio. I have a whole bunch more questions. I'm going to have to speed run through them. We're going to do our best. But first, let me talk to you about Gramblin. BetOnline.net is your one-stop shop for all things sports betting and other betting too, but mostly sports betting. You can find all sorts of odds and lines and spreads and all that stuff. You can find any NFL game for the 2022 season. You can literally bet on a random Week 6 game if you'd like. You can bet on, of course, win totals, playoff odds, where your team is going to finish in the division, be it the Vikings. Bet on them finishing second in the NFC North or finishing first in the NFC North. Screw it. I don't know. I'm not the cops. You can bet on all that stuff and all kinds of other sports and events. You can even bet right in the middle of an event with their live betting module. See if you think the team's going to make a comeback at halftime or whatever. You can go do that. You can find all of it at betonline.net, where the game starts. Hey, thanks y'all so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. For your second listen, I'd love it if you checked out the history documentary. I'm into the meat of it. We have gotten to the part where they lose all the Super Bowls, and so a lot of the setup is now paying off. A lot of the, hey, look at how much you love these people. Now let's go see how far they made it. And the payoff there, I'm really, really happy with how it turned out. So go check it out. It's at my Patreon, patreon.com/LukeBraun NFL. Would love it if you join. I would love you if you join me there as well. You can also check out the Minnesota Football Party Mondays and Thursdays on the Locked On Minnesota Sports podcast feed alongside Superior Sports Talk and the Ron Johnson Show. You can find all that. That's an ensemble show with me and a bunch of other Vikings writers, podcasters, bloggers, stuff. Very fun stuff. Let's continue with this mailbag. Michael Schneider asks, I heard the Vikings may be looking to trade for a center. Do you have any players in mind that we could trade for? And how much do you think it would cost? So the one I cannot get out of my head, and I'm sure there's lots of situations like this around the league, but the Broncos one is the one that I'm obsessed with. Lloyd Cushenberry is their starter. He's been a solid starter for a couple of years, but they have a 5th-round rookie who's sort of blowing up and is taking first-round reps and might render Lloyd Cushenberry obsolete in their organization. Now, the other thing, we have Chris Cooper, his former offensive line coach, so we know that we've got a fan of his in the building, right? Was there when they drafted him. He knows the same scheme. He knows terminology. He already has a rapport with some of the staff, so that makes a ton of sense, and it makes sense money-wise. Lloyd Cushenberry is only in the 3rd year of a rookie deal, and he's actually costs less cap-wise this year than Garrett Bradbury, and so you could do, cost-wise, I don't know. It'll all be really depressed because of where we are. Everybody kind of knows, hey, you're probably cutting this guy if you can't find a trade deal for him, so I'm not exactly going to pay out the nose for you, and that's probably true of the Broncos in negotiation with the Vikings, and it's probably true of the Vikings in negotiation of trying to trade away Bradbury. If you did trade for Lloyd Cushenberry and then, say, try to trade Bradbury away to somebody like the Browns, who have lost a couple centers, they actually really need some bodies there. If you go call up Cleveland and say, hey, we'll trade you Bradbury, they'll go, we know you just traded for Cushenberry, and we know he's kind of an expendable piece for you, so we're not exactly going to give you everything. Maybe their desperation allows you to sort of say, well, we know you need one, so we're going to make you pay anyways, and maybe that could help, but either way, the Cushenberry thing is what I'm looking for, and if you know of any other situations like that around the league, that's kind of where my eye is going for what a center could be. I would probably take that situation over just putting Chris Reed in or Austin Schlottman. Josh asks, I haven't heard anything about Scene. Obviously, that can be a good thing, but I'd still like an update. I do not think that it is a good thing. I rewatched Scene on the All-22 in the preseason game, and what I found was, I think what some other people have been describing, I finally got a chance to really sit down and look at it. He's very late a lot. And he's clearly reacting to what he's seeing and not to what he knows. And what I mean by that, when you're reacting to what you know is going to happen, you're reacting to tape study signals. You're kind of saying, okay, when they come out in this formation, a lot of times it's this kind of thing, and I'm going to go react. Watch Harrison Smith. He reacts to what he knows. He responds to what he has studied, to what he's confident in, and he's playing with anticipation, not guessing, but with anticipation. It's not unlike a quarterback thing. You want to throw with anticipation. As a safety, you kind of want to run at things. You want to attack with anticipation. Right now, Lewis Scene is attacking things after they've revealed themselves, and it makes him really late. Now, he has the athleticism to be to minimize how late that is. He's bursty as hell, he's fast as hell. But right now, I don't think he's better than Cam Bynum. And when you're sort of reacting to what you see and not to what you feel or to what you know. That's not the kind of thing that changes overnight. So I don't think he's going to be better than Bynum by week one. I would expect Bynum to win that job based on what I've seen so far until I see Lewis Seen start to turn that corner and play with a little more anticipation. There were a couple plays where he did that very well. So I don't think he's like miles and miles away, but I don't think he's going to get there by week one. And that's okay. That's how rookies go. You know, these guys are not universally ready by week one. If you've been paying any attention, we kind of know that by now. TZ asks, if you were offered a 7th round pick for Alexander Mattison right now, would you take the deal? 7 is pretty cheap. That doesn't quite feel like enough for what Mattison offers. That said, if we are going to go down that line of questioning, and you know, that puts us in a situation, if we thought, okay, your room is Cook, Wangu, and Chandler, which I do think is a plausible scenario, and then, you know, you save almost like $1 million by cutting Mattison, and you might even want to do that anyways because Mattison has continued to display vision issues. He displayed pass protection issues in camp. Like, I do see the world where he just gets cut on merit. So in that case, yeah, sure, you know, you'd take anything you can get, but I do think if I'm trying to shop Mattison, I think I can push for a little more than that. I think Mattison is generally worth a little bit more than that, and it's more circumstance and a camp performance that would get him cut, but I think you could probably eke like a 6th or a 5th out of him, which would be nice. You know, you get 3 years, you spend a 3rd round, get 3 years out of a guy, and then get a pick back in return. That's not the worst return on investment. Jamal Love asks, okay, crazy take. With our RB depth, what if we traded Cook for an elite center? A lot of talk about ditching Mattison when an elite running back may not be necessary in our scheme. Okay, so elite running back in this scheme can do all sorts of really dope things. They have running backs running choice routes. That is something we saw in this game, and that should set off all sorts of alarm bells that this is not going to be the running back passing that we're used to seeing in other offenses. This is not screens and swing passes. These guys are running real routes, and having a guy, and essentially they're a way to get the guy the ball with forward momentum in front of the line of scrimmage and in space. It's, you know, if you want to get your running back to the second level, why don't you just put the running back on the second level and throw to him, you know? That's what these choice routes are doing. And if you can run those routes well, that's really cool. I think Dalvin Cook can absolutely explode there. So I wouldn't mess that up. If you wanted to trade Dalvin Cook away, if you could get a really good center for it, that's probably a plus value thing. That probably does more for the run game than Dalvin Cook would. Like a really good center is a really, really important piece. I don't think anyone's giving you a really good center for Dalvin Cook. I think that's probably pie in the sky. I guess you'd take it, but you'd take it because the Vikings win that trade so much that it's not like a realistic trade. I have way more questions. I want to get to all of them. You guys ask great questions, and I want to make sure I get to them. But first, let me talk to you about your car. With rockauto.com, you can get anything and everything you can possibly need for your car. If your car needs a repair, a new part, you can go to Rock Auto. You can order that part, just enter your make, your year, and your model. They will sort it all through their insanely gigantic catalog. They've been doing this online for like 15 years. They got all the contacts. They will go through their catalog, give you parts that work for your car. Probably the same parts or equivalent parts, in a different box, but probably from like even the same manufacturer, right off the same assembly line that your mechanic is ordering from, but it's going straight to your door and you're cutting out the middleman and you stand to save $1. So why spend 30, 50, even 100% more on car parts when you can just go right to the mouth of the river with rockauto.com and make sure in the How You Heard About Us section that you let them know that Locked On sent you. And if you don't, the rabbits will do war crimes. Rock Auto, amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. Moving on with this Twitter Tuesday mailbag, going to rip through some of these last ones, try to rapid fire this. The next one comes from East Coast Vikings fan who says, would you rather bet on Kirk Cousins winning a primetime regular season game against an elite team like peak Aaron Rodgers, or a Vikings kicker making a game-winning field goal in a playoff game? Okay, this is pretty hard. The primetime thing doesn't matter to me. Kirk Cousins' primetime is not. It's more of a remember, like a memory bias thing. It doesn't actually play out. He doesn't play any worse in primetime than he does regularly. It's just that primetime games tend to be against better teams. Better teams will beat you more often because they're better. But there is something with Kirk Cousins going against better teams versus worse teams. He's more extreme at the ends than other quarterbacks. He's better against bad teams than other quarterback. Like the improve, everybody sees an improvement when you go against a bad team versus a good team, but this is a statistical thing. And honestly, I think tape bears it out too. When Kirk Cousins goes up against a bad team, he improves more than other quarterbacks improve. He beats up bad teams better. And a lot of his habits are because, he's really a lot better at like punishing mistakes. But finding weaknesses in stronger teams is not as good. So when he's up against good teams, everybody gets a little worse when they're up against good teams, but Kirk does to a greater degree, right? So all of that, assuming that it's already a good team. So that is pretty scary. I think I'm taking my chances with the kicker because while we are all superstitious and it's very cursed, I would imagine the odds are probably better of a game-winning kick than of Kirk Cousins winning a game where you're like touchdown underdogs or something, right? Which is what that would be. So probably taking the kick over the really unlikely thing. Kevin asks, you are given access to a top secret government project that can make any person grow 12 inches. Which Vikings player do you make 1 foot taller? I think I'm going with Kirk Cousins. He's already very, like, height is not a problem for him, but making him that tall would actually probably have some really, really cool effects, especially in the red zone. And 12 inches of height, assuming I'm not also adding 12 inches of weight, which he didn't say, so I might just be making somebody really weird looking. I feel like quarterback's the best place to put that, because if you put that on somebody like a tight end or a wide receiver, you might make it a lot harder for them to run. You might make them a lot slower, like a basketball player running around, like a big man center is just not going to have as much up and down the court athleticism, right? I feel like the same thing is going to apply unless you're making it like a long, lanky Randy Moss thing. But if I make Cameron Dantzler a foot taller, does that make him a bunch slower? And then guys can just run past him, right? So I don't want to ruin a player by this, and I feel like this could ruin a lot of players. Like it really ruin an offensive or a defensive lineman. Yeah, I want to add some size to Garrett Bradbury, but if I make him, 7'1" or whatever his height is, like then that's the worst center height ever. You're going to get your pads way too high all the time. Everybody's going to get under you, and you're going to lose a lot of leverage battles. So I'm thinking Kirk Cousins because having that much height, again, hopefully it won't ruin his throwing motion. I am a little worried about that, but I'm less worried about that than I am with other positions. And then from that height, it can help your throwing angles. It can really help you in the red zone. It can help you if you're throwing, from top down. Can help you get like over guys and if he can still do the touch. I think Kirk Cousins is the answer to this, but I would be open to hearing other ones. Pellyvike asks, if you could remove one player on this current Vikings team and replace them with one player of the same position on any past Vikings team, and then the player that you remove from this year's team has to go play on the past team, which would you pick to benefit both teams? Okay, it's so hard that I have to benefit both teams, right? Because it'd be super easy to be like, who would you steal from a past Vikings? I get that question a lot. Who would you steal from a past Vikings team? But if I have to somehow make this a win-win, that's really hard. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to take somebody bigger from this team. I'll say Dalvin Tomlinson, somebody big and strong. And I'm going to send him back to the 70s. And then I'm going to bring back Alan Page. Now, I don't know if I've made that 70s team better because Alan Page is insane. Alan Page is insane here, and that's really cool. But somebody of Dalvin Tomlinson's size and stature playing in the 70s is probably going to be way more elite because players back then were way smaller, and a player with today's athleticism would be awesome. So I think Dalvin Tomlinson in the 70s would be a superstar Hall of Famer. And Alan Page had the quickness to play Aaron Donald-style football, and I think he would survive in the common era here, and I think that could be like the penetrating three-tech we've all been really begging for. That's my shot at it. But boy, I had to really thread a needle and do some cherry picking for that one. Jamese Quits asks, given Chris Boyd's strong performance, where do you currently see him in the CB pecking order behind Evans? No, I think I see him ahead of Evans, behind Booth, and that would make him cornerback 4. Because you have Peterson, Cameron Dantzler, Booth, and then I think Chris Boyd's the 4th best on there, which is not the greatest depth. There's another concerned one for you. Chowchich asks, who is winning spots at CB2 and nickel behind P2, and how are they doing in camp? So Cameron Dantzler is probably your second corner, your second starting corner after Peterson, and then Andrew Booth is probably the next guy. In terms of nickel, Chandon Sullivan is pretty much got the job. He probably had it by default, but if he didn't, then he ran away with it. He's far and away the best nickel in camp. And then it's a competition between Nate Hairston and Harrison Hand, and I think Hairston has outplayed Hand. Hand has made some mistakes. Hairston has been a little more consistent and a little more flashy in the run. That's at least what I've seen, although I haven't looked at that position a whole lot. So if you've heard something from somebody else who watched it closer, probably go with them. Ethan Bushlack asks, opinions on Mac over Kirk in NFL's top 100? Nope. I don't have any opinions on that. The top 100 is voted on by players. Most players just vote for their friends. I don't really care about it. I don't care about really any rankings, and I don't think it really, I don't really know what it points to. Are people saying Mac Jones is better than Kirk Cousins? Okay, whatever. They're not the same player, and they don't really have the same skill set, and comparing them to me is kind of a fruitless exercise. And then finally, Joshua Brook asks, it's 4th and goal. Arif Hassan is at wide receiver, and you are the cornerback. Do you think he'd best you, or would you best him? Okay, I love that you have made Arif the receiver, because Arif played cornerback when he was younger, and arguably attempted to play cornerback in a fantastic video you can ask Tom Schreier for. But now you're making him switch positions. But if he has to box me out, I've got like 5 inches on him. Arif is short, so yeah, no, I can totally do this. And unless he's going to push off, you better hope he gets away with it. I don't think he can do it without committing a penalty. I'm very skinny. I'm very easy to push over, but it's illegal to do that with the ball in the air. So I think I can keep up with him for sure. That's going to do it for this mailbag. I will see you all tomorrow. Check out the history doc. Check out the Minnesota football party. And as always, Skol.